Hello and happy sexy first Friday for June. It's already June. I'm just gonna wait for Lyndsey to join. Hopefully that works. Today's topic is busting myths about instincts.
Hi, work
It
first
worked.
time. Yay.
We always start a little early in case of technical glitches, which we have had abundantly, but I guess not today.
Not today. It's great. It's like a first.
Happy June, Lyndsey. Happy to see you.
Nice to see you as well again, Sam.
So, this month's topic is busting myths about instincts and subtypes. And we'll introduce ourselves if you don't know us and also tell you a little bit about why we're doing this topic when we are. So, I'm Sam E Greenberg. I'm a sexuality researcher and an Enneagram sexuality and relationships coach. And my research explores the intersection of Enneagram type and instinct with patterns of sexual desire and expression. How about you, Lyndsey?
I am Lyndsey Fraser. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist and IA accredited professional out of South Minneapolis, where I have a practice that I specialize in relationships and sexuality.
Perfect. So, Lyndsey, why don't you tell everybody why we're doing this particular topic right now and how it dovetails with the Enneagram Summit?
Yes, we decided to do this topic right now because, well, one, we are part of Tyler Zach's Enneagram Summit, which is on subtypes right now. And also because subtypes are becoming a little bit more hot, as I would say, in the Enneagram world. And I think it's important for us to look at some of the myths or the things that we believe about instincts that may or may not be true, because there's quite a few things out there that are not true, and there are some things that are true, and there's some things that are a little bit of both. That Anya Summit, you can still join. I do have a link in my bio if you still want to join. Today I think is is today the last day of it, Sam? Today is the last day of it, but he has had some really wonderful speakers on there. There is Beatrice and Uranio and Ian Crone, and was Susan on there too? I don't know. I can't remember. He's got lots and lots of great speakers on there. And so there's a lot of people you can get access to and hear them talk about different subtypes. Sam and I were very excited to be on there as people that could talk a little bit about the role of instincts in desire and attraction. And so don't hesitate to hop over to Gospel of Enneagram and join the summit as well. And then I just think it's just really important for us to be talking about that, because one of the things that Sam and I have talked about before, especially in sexuality, is our instincts play such a bigger factor than our type does in desire and attraction and intimacy. And if we're not clear on what are truths about instincts and what are myths, we might be missing some things about ourselves, about others in our lives, that are really important to understand the complexities of what is actually true. Anything you would add, Sam?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think just as when the Enneagram really started taking off in popular consciousness, we had a lot of stereotypes about type flying around that had sometimes some truth, but not all the way true or not true at all, that we really needed to bust those myths. Now, subtypes and instincts are getting bigger in the popular consciousness around the Enneagram. And just like Lyndsey said, we want to make sure people understand the nuances around those things so that they're the most useful. And then, of course, we talk all the time about how essential the dominant instinct is for sexuality. And so for us, it's extra, extra important to really understand clearly these myths, which things are myths and which things are not myths around instincts. So we thought what we would do is start out with three big myths that we have heard repeatedly, one for each instinct, and we're just going to chat about those, and they're all related to sexuality in the cases of what we were choosing here. And then we've had folks write in some myths, some sexuality related and some not, and we'll go ahead and bust some of those after. So, Lyndsey, should we dive into our three myths?
Yes, why don't you start us off with the sexual instinct?
Okay. Diet Smoking Coke says, sounds fun. We agree. Okay, so this first myth was actually the inspiration for this episode. It's a very near and dear to my heart myth. So the myth is that the sexual instinct is not about sex, that it's nothing to do with sex. That's the myth that we are here to bust. And this is a really nuanced one, so buckle up for some nuance. So when instincts were first being talked about, obviously we had social, self-preservation, sexual, and because sexual is called sexual, people were misunderstanding and thinking that everyone who is sexual dominant is a really sexual person or has a really high sex drive or thinks about sex all the time. And that's not true. That was the original myth, that's not true. But it's swung now really far in the other direction, where some traditions, for example, the narrative tradition, calls the sexual instinct the one-to-one instinct, which is totally fine because sexual dominants do prefer one-on-one connection. But now the sexual aspect of sexual dominance has been a little bit drained out of the understanding of it. So we're here to bust the myth that the sexual instinct is not sexual. It is and it's not. So let's talk about it a little bit, Lyndsey. My perspective on this is yes, the sexual instinct is actually about experiencing depth and passion and kind of getting carried away with the moment, the juiciness of life, the chemistry that doesn't have to be sexual chemistry. So, for example, a sexual dominant will find someone in a new group of people that they don't have to be attracted to sexually, that they feel this chemistry with and they just want to connect with them more. That's all true. But what's also true is that our sexual dominants do tend to have a more overt sexual energy happening with them. And they do tend to feel sexual energy more and be more interested in kind of playing around with it between people. This is my perspective as a sexual dominant, and I'm really interested to hear your perspective, Lyndsey, as someone with sexual last, on this myth that the sexual instinct is not about sex.
I think one of the things that I see like in my practice with clients is that they're really, when we think about the sexuality piece of the sexual instinct, they really do want to be desirable. They want people to be attracted to them. They want to be playing with that sexual energy. And I think what's nuanced about this is it isn't necessarily all about wanting to have sex with that person. It is about the energy that is happening in between. And so this is kind of a both end to me. I think that it is one-to-one. You are right in the sense that, like, sexual instinct dominants are going to go into a room and they're going to find the one person they have the most chemistry with. And they are going to be drawn to them and they're going to want to engage with them. And it might be about sexual attraction and it might not be. But they're still probably going to want that person to find them attractive, whether they intend to be sexually intimate with them or not. And I think that because of how we think of sexuality in society and how sometimes there can be shame around wanting this, we are trying to change the language and call it something it isn't. Your social and self-preservation people do not want to be as desired in the same ways that sexual instinct dominants do. And I think that one of the things as a sexual instinct repressed person is like when this intensity of energy that they want to be in with can be so overwhelming for people that it is not dominant. And then when they don't feel that from you, they're afraid that there's chemistry missing. And so I think, like we've talked about before, sexual instinct is the most nuanced of the three, and it can be hard to understand. And I think when we bring in sexuality in society and the shame and the messages, like, I shouldn't want to be attractive and desirable. Why not? What's wrong with wanting that or that being a part of who you are, whether you intend to act upon it or not? So I think it's just a great reminder that it is about sex and it isn't about sex. It's a both end here. And I see we have sexual two say yes. They completely agree. Thank you, Diet Smoking folks.
And I had someone, a sexual dominant on a training, say, it's not necessarily about sex for me, but it's like all eyes on me. I really want to be seen and be the center of attention. So we've said a bunch of times before, any instinct can have a high or low libido. It's not that our sexual dominants have a high one and the, social and self-pres have low. That's not true at all. So within the sexual instinct, we have higher and lower libido happening across people and across the lifespan and stuff. So this person was saying, like, for them, it's not a super high libido situation, but they're still wanting all eyes on them. They're still wanting to feel that attention, that desire from others. So I'm loving all of this conversation and what Diet Smoke and Coke said. It's really about the energy, flirting, chemistry for sure, not any physical act. The last thing I want to say about that, jumping off of that comment, which I love, is that one of the funny things about sexual dominance is that once the energy that we're playing with someone is actually like getting actualized, like it's a will they won't they kind of vibe, and then suddenly the person is like, yes, I do like you, I am interested in you, we often will lose interest because it's not actually about the sexual act itself. It's about this being desired, being in the energy and like playing with it and going back and forth. And Misty, hi Misty said, yes, finding the person with chemistry. Okay, so I think we've been talking about this one for a while. We could probably do a whole episode at least just on this myth, but we have a myth for each instinct. So let's move into our social instinct myth, Lyndsey. Which social instinct myth was that our social instinct dominants care more about other people than they care about their own partner. Can you speak to that one, Lyndsey?
Yeah. Yes, I think this is a really interesting myth because one of the things that social dominants want to do is bring their partner with them to the groups that are important and essential to them. And so sometimes how that can be interpreted is that the group is more important than the partner or one-on-one relationship. What's interesting is oftentimes actually for social dominants, when we bring our partners into groups, I'm a social dominant as well, like if they are charismatic or if somebody finds them interesting, like desire and attraction really forms. And so it isn't about the group being more important, though we are a little bit more attuned to the group. So it can be sometimes like we are still attuning to the group and making sure everybody's being okay. And sometimes we're not attuning to our partners, especially if you have sexual instinct in the last position and maybe the ways that they would desire and like. But like the fact that we're bringing you with and we want you to be a part is really what creates that desire, attraction, all that juiciness for us. But I think it can be interpreted as if the group is more important than the partnership. And so that's the parts that I would add to that. What would you add to that, Sam, or what have you noticed?
The one new piece of nuance I want to add to this social instinct myth is the idea that social instincts prefer a group to one-on-one interaction is actually not true at all. Sometimes we have our extroverted social instinct dominants who prefer big groups, but our introverted social instinct dominants, of which there are abundant, including yourself, Lyndsey, right? Actually, they prefer one-on-one connection too. So that's why the one-on-one name for sexual instinct dominance can be a little confusing, because social instinct dominance can also prefer one-on-one, and even self-preservation instinct dominance can prefer one-on-one. But for social instinct, it's the way the connection is happening is different, and the way the connection will be happening with the partner, the preferred way, is different. So I wonder if like we can talk a little bit about that, the way that social instinct preferences for one-on-one connection are different than sexual instinct preferences.
I think it's interesting because we've talked about this before, sort of if we take the three, right? Like sexual instinct energy is like hot and spicy and give and take and back and forth. And our social dominants are kind of like, we're warm and tending and hug, like this warm energy. And our self-preservations are going to be in sexuality, because I've gotten corrected on this, are going to be more cold, because you might actually see the opposite socially with self-preservation and social. So we are specifically talking about how they show up sexually. And it's interesting because like, duh, like I like being home a lot. just with my spouse and my partner. But I think it's really interesting. Like, it's not playing with sexual energy that becomes the way that we are connecting and bonding. And some of this is going to be unique to me having a self-preservation partner. So we actually probably meet on some of that, like tending and taking care of each other and some of this. And like, I want to be like, I want, that kind of quality time, one-on-one connection, which I actually do think is something that is true for all social dominants, because there is something really beautiful sort of about having that. And like, even in other relationships, I am actually more comfortable one-on-one with people. Like, I will choose to go have coffees, or if I am with a group, when I want to connect, it's going to be a smaller group of like 4 people. And that really is what feels more comfortable. And like, sort of like, because as social dominants, we are so in tune to everybody in the group that it can get extremely overstimulating or overwhelming when we're in larger groups of people. So this, even outside of sexuality, is one of these huge myths for social dominance, that we just love big groups of people. Actually, most of us really dislike it and are really uncomfortable with it and feel really overwhelmed and overstimulated. And then type will play a piece in that as well. But it really is like, we do really like those one-on-one. And I think that's really interesting, like with that one-on-one dynamic that you're saying, because all 3 like one-on-one relationships and one-on-one connection. And so if we can get confused then on like what our actual instinct is, if we're going from that one-to-one sort of angle.
Sometimes I have people who are sort of trying to find their dominant instinct to type themselves, saying like, well, I prefer one-on-one connection, therefore I'm sexual dominant. And that's why I think it's so important to bust that first myth. And then when you drill down, it's like, oh, I just want to share a drink and like get to know someone and like understand them better and relate. And it's like, okay, that's social. Like, if I want to, be zipping back and forth with energy and like really feeling into this depth and this eye contact and this intensity, that's sexual. So it's quite different, but like you said, Lyndsey, all 3 instincts like to have one-on-one relationships. Should we move on to our self-preservation dominant myth? This is a big one, especially as our work gets more out in the world, Lyndsey. I've noticed that self-preservation instincts getting a little bit of a reputation for having a low sex drive or libido because of the fact that we're saying, for example, our self-pres couples tend to have less sex than, for example, our sexual couples. And lots of other reasons that people are thinking that, but that is not true. So any instinct can have any libido, high or low. And what we see with self-preservations is that just their feeling of desire, of libido or sexual energy coming up, and oh, I'd really like to actualize that, doesn't mean they're going to do it, because they may have all these other things going on. Whereas for sexual instinct dominance, that energy coming up, they're more likely to go ahead and actualize it. Lyndsey, what do you want to say about the nuance of this one? Because there's definitely a lot of nuance here too.
I think what's interesting too is that, yes, it's not a desire issue at all. It's actually a context issue. It's how many barriers do they have in place to actually move through and actualize sex. They might actually choose solo sex, even when desire is present. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is sometimes what I see with self-preservation dominance is that when they have, like, so for instance, kids leave home, maybe you retire, maybe you have less going on in your life, all of a sudden they're having more sex and they think they have become sexual instinct dominant, and they have not. So this is another myth, that because if I'm having a lot of sex, I must be sexual instinct dominant. The reality is you just have less context. And I also think what a beautiful thing to share with some self-preservers, because sometimes they're like, I'm like, no, actually my retired self-preservers and the ones that have the kids that have left home, they're having more sex. Especially if they've tended to the relationships well, right? Like if they've tended to the relationships throughout the course of the longer term relationship that they've had, like they're having more sex. And no, you're not becoming sexual instinct dominant. I'm sorry, you're still self-pres. You just have less context coming into play. So I think that's a good one to mention as well for people, because I think there's been some confusion or myths around that too.
Totally. So we call that, Lyndsey and I call that the self-pres desire bounce back that happens, bouncing back to maybe where it even was when you were really a young person. And it tends to take people by surprise and be like a really pleasant surprise. I just encountered someone who was saying this exact thing, of a woman like in her 50s or so saying, I think I've become sexual instinct dominant because I'm really into sex now. And it's like a big part of my life. And it wasn't before. And it was exactly what you're saying. Things, context in their lives had decreased, and there was a lot of spaciousness, and so she was really enjoying becoming a more and more sexual person. It was like, I think I'm sexual instinct dominant now. I was like, no, you're still self-pres in terms of what makes you feel safe. If you became very stressed all of a sudden, you would go right back to your self-pres behaviors. So I think that was, we snuck an extra myth in there. Lyndsey, that was great. So we had some folks submit myths on their own instincts and subtypes for us to either bust or confirm. So we'll do that next. Some of them are about sex and relationships, and some are just general. So what about this one, Lyndsey, to start with? Sexual fours are the angriest or cruelest of all subtypes, is the myth. What do we think about that one?
This one was hard because there is some truth in it as well as some myths in it, in the sense that I think if you asked a lot of people that have encountered a sexual four when frustrated or angry with them, they may actually agree that this is true. Now, the nuance with this, I think, is to understand what's actually happening for the sexual four underneath them, for them to have those behaviors and actions. They're not intending to be cruel. They're not intending to be mean. What they're actually doing is, in my perspective, is projecting the pain that they feel. And the way that they can project that pain that they're feeling is through the intensity. And so for them, they're not trying to be cruel or mean. They're really showing you, this is how much pain I am in right now because of what just happened in relationship with us. And so I think it's a very nuanced thing. And I think we need to figure out a different term for this, because it's just projection. It's just a projection of pain and a projection of the wounding that they're feeling inside and the rejection that they are experiencing. And because you have four and you have the intensity, you're going to get a little bit of what I'll call like a little bit of a lashing, a projection lashing coming out to people. So whoever wrote this, I'm sorry, part of it is true. But I think that also what we need to know is that we need to have compassion, empathy, and understanding for why somebody is doing what they're doing. And really what they're showing you is this is the amount of pain that they are in.
And keeping in mind, we have some of our subtypes that, by nature of how intense they are going to act out or lash out more externally when they are triggered, like our sexual fours, like our sexual eights, who people also experience as being quite mean when they're unhappy. But that we're all doing a lot of unhealthy things when we are triggered, and it's just sometimes they're inside us. And just because they're inside for perhaps our nines or fives doesn't mean that people aren't negatively affected also. So I think another part of that myth that is actually mythical is that, just doing externally kind of lashing out is cruel, whereas doing the nine, for example, passive aggressive, stubborn, digging in thing isn't cruel. Well, that's also cruel. So I think the way to look at this is that all subtypes are cruel in some way when they're triggered, and with sexual fours we just see it more.
I think what's interesting too is because, like, in my therapy practice, what I will tell people, the nine behavior of withdrawal, unavailability, not being present, stubbornness is just as damaging and as cruel as what the sexual four is doing. I just love what you said there, Sam, with that sort of like there's the external, the internal. And if we're completely honest, sometimes us nines are thinking it. We just don't say it to you. And I think that's what's interesting too, is like I always take the stance of like, We need to have generosity for people in our lives. And the term generosity that I love that comes from Brene Brown is that all of us are trying the best that we can at any given moment. And in that process, we still sometimes unintentionally hurt others. So if we start to think of people that we engage with in sort of that type of way, we become softer even when they're doing things that are painful. It doesn't mean we'll hold them accountable. Doesn't mean we don't like point it out when they're doing it, but we recognize that in that moment, that person really was trying the best that they can. And of course, there is some nuance with this. If you're dealing with people that have personality, we could go more into that. I'm not going to go into that today because I know we could get that question. Yes, of course, there's nuance. But in general, the majority of us are trying the best that we can at any given moment to show up in the world. And if we look at that, we will think of people in a very different way.
I love that. We should all keep that in mind for every instinct and every subtype. Let's do another myth. So this one is on social instinct dominance, and the myth is that social instinct dominance all want status. And I definitely want you to speak to this, Lyndsey, as a social dominant, but in my experience of social dominance, this definitely does not apply to our social fours very much, to our social nines very much, even to our social fives very much. So there's a lot of nuance within type here. What do you think, Lyndsey, about this one?
I think it was interesting because like when I've seen this one before, kind of my head pops to, well, I think that social threes are like that. But then I realized like I have a social three right now in my practice that I am working with. And it isn't as important to him in the way that we think of status. So some of this is nuanced in the sense that too, as far as messages that you got, as far as like, what do I need to do to be impressive? Or what do I need to do to be successful? And for some people, status might fit into that, even with the traditionally where we think that threes would be thinking about this a lot. But the reality is not all of them do. Like it really just depends on like what they think they need to do and how they need to show up. So some will be and some will not be. I think that really what it comes down to is that they want to be a part of the group and they want to belong. So it really isn't actually about status, but I can see how people on the outside sort of interpret it that way because it looks as if, right? We want to have a place. We are paying attention to hierarchy, like where's my position? What do I want to be? Yes, exactly. It's way more about just not being invisible. I love that. I love what Regal Beagle just said there as far as that it really isn't, sort of about that. And that's exactly how I would state it is it's like, we just don't want to be invisible. We want to belong and we want to have a place within the group as well.
That's perfect. Super helpful nuance. And I think, of course, if you're seeking belonging as a social dominant, a lot of times you're like, what are they thinking of me? That's the kind of thing social dominants will like ruminate over. And people see that that happening, see the social dominant being like, oh man, like what do those people think of me? And it seems like you care about the status in the group when actually you care about belonging. So thanks so much for making that distinction. Well, we have time for a few more, so I'm going to go like kind of quickly to our next couple of myths. So the next one was from a self-preservation dominant saying, basically the myth is that self-preservation dominants wouldn't have sex in a uncomfortable place like a car. And they're saying, actually, I would do that if my partner was into it. But this person was a two. So I think this is a good opportunity to talk about type. So our self-preservation dominants, as a general rule, they want to be comfortable for moving into sexuality. They want to be comfortable, warm, not hungry, not thirsty, have a shower. Like, that's true. But when we get some of our more other-oriented types, like our twos and our nines, especially twos, they're gonna still be doing more what the partner wants, even as a self-preservation dominant, especially if they have social second, because the social instinct often follows the partner's lead also. So this one is like a true and not true myth. It is true that self-preservation people often will not be into sex on the beach and we're gonna get sand everywhere and that doesn't sound fun. But there's always exceptions, and especially with our other oriented types. Anything to add, Lyndsey?
The one thing that I would add is that, and we've talked about this before, but like in the beginning of a relationship, everybody goes with sexual instinct first. So in that first 9 months to year and a half, when those chemicals are being produced at higher levels, you are going to go from sexual instinct dominant energy, even if you're not sexual instinct dominant. And so you might see behaviors that you wouldn't normally do because you're kind of in that, and then it will kind of go back to its position. But I think, you've got a good point too here as well, because I was thinking too, it's like, well, even if you had an attachment type, right? Like, a 3, 6, or 9, and they were self-preservation. They still might engage in these kinds of behaviors because they want to please the partner, or they want to make sure that they're kind of, so like for 9s, like, well, I don't want to have conflict. My partner really wants to do this, so I'll do it. For trust, security, or reassurance, the 6 might be like, yeah, I'm kind of on the fence, but to keep, and interesting thing with self-preservation 6s, they can look very social dominant, even when they're not, because they're always scanning the environment and the people around them and making sure that they have a place and position and connection. And so you might actually see self-preservation 6s do it a little bit more too, especially if the partner is a sexual instinct dominant. And so I think it's really kind of important to really pay attention to those components or pieces too, that there isn't like a steadfast rule here as far as what things might look like. Now, they might be doing it more because of the partner's desire than because of their own. That is the piece I think that's essential. I actually loved too what Regal Beagle said here is, even when I go to the doctor, I want to win the doctor's approval rather than getting good health care. I can relate as a social dominant myself. I want the doctor to like me. So thanks for sharing that too.
That is hilarious. I'm glad you read that. Well, let's see if we can quickly get through because we had 2 more we really wanted to cover. And this next one, I love the language of it. So the myth is that self-preservation dominants find sexual dominance to be cringe. So I'm loving the Gen Z slang there. It was more of a question, like, do self-preservation dominants find sexual dominance to be cringe? But I'm going to present it as a myth because it's a myth, mostly. Self-preservation and sexual instincts being almost opposite and very, very different. Self-preservation dominance, when they're stressed, can get quite overwhelmed by the sexual instinct to the point that the sexual instinct can feel like clingy or like grabby, like too much demanding. Social instincts also as well. But in a general sense, what I have seen is that self-preservation dominants are really into sexual dominance, actually. They're really kind of swept away by the way that sexual dominants aren't bothered by all the things that they're bothered by. So there's this opposites attract thing that happens, and I have worked with an enormous number of self-preservation sexual couples because of this. So I'd say this is like mostly a myth that self-preservations think sexuals are cringe. I think the only time that would happen is if there's unhealthiness happening on either end, either super unhealthy self-preservation person super stressed when the sexual instinct's coming towards them, or the sexual instinct that's super stressed and is really overdoing it, then we can get a little cringe happening. But in general, no, they're actually super into it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add quick, Lyndsey? I want to see if we can get our last one in really
Yeah.
quick too.
I would say I agree with you, and I think where you might get more of the cringe factor is if the sexual instinct is in the last position versus a self-preservation sexual. But even then, I still see my sexual instinct repressed self-preservers being really highly attracted to sexual instinct dominance.
Yeah. Okay. Super quick. Our last one was this myth about your blind instinct or your repressed or last instinct, and this idea that like maybe you can't change it or can't work on it, can't develop it. So the question around this was like, are there actionable items actually to grow our repressed instinct, or is it kind of a lost cause? And the person who wrote in was a sexual instinct blind person. So Lyndsey, I felt like you were the best person to answer that in terms of actionable items, but it is a myth that you can't develop your blind instinct or that it's like a lost cause. It does take a lot of concentrated effort over time, though.
Yeah, I would completely agree. As someone that has the sexual instinct in the repressed position myself, I have done significant work to try to activate it. One being, I'm wearing bright purple today. That's one thing you can do. Before I started working on the sexual instinct, for instance, I had a lot of neutral clothes in my wardrobe, so you would have seen a lot of like beiges, grays, muted. If there was a color, it was a very muted color. And I've intentionally started to wear more color to feel more alive and sort of what I'm doing. And dancing, there's all kinds of different ways. Dancing is another way to do it. You know, sitting in uncomfortableness and intensity when it kind of comes towards you. But you can definitely develop your repressed instinct. There's more practical ones if you're social or self-preservation repressed than I think that there are for sexual instinct. But we did an episode on repressed instinct, so you could always go back and see that as well. It may be harder to find on our Instagram feed, but we do also have a YouTube channel that is also linked in my bio that you can get to that has them all listed out if you ever wanted to go back, because we actually did a full episode on repressed instincts and how to work on them and how to activate them more. And I think what's interesting too is that I love that considered leopard print. I will. Do I have any leopard animal print? I don't. Maybe that's the next place I have to go is get some animal print in my wardrobe. Thank you for the recommendation. And I think that, you know, just that you can go back and kind of see those. But yes, we can always, now it takes conscious effort. It takes conscious work, like anything else when you're working on yourself, right? And it will always, I don't really think you can really move it to the top. You know, maybe you can be more balanced with your second because you're a little bit more neurotic around your first one. But I think you can definitely develop it and have it not be, I mean, I was completely clueless, if I'm completely honest, even what sexual instinct energy was up until maybe the last 5 years. And now I know what it is. I know how to activate it. And there's some like really exciting things sort of, actually, I feel much more alive. And it's been such an exciting experience to actually activate this in me. And I know that you've done a lot of work on your self-preservation, repressed instinct too, Sam, and activating that. And it's also brought you some of the same things, which is interesting, right? As far as feeling more in control. And you can speak for yourself, but you've talked about that too.
Yes, definitely. So I'm gonna probably have to talk about that on a different episode because we are definitely out of time. But let's quickly tell everybody about our Enneagram and Sexuality for Transformed Relationships workshop that is coming up in July. Lyndsey, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Sam and I are having an in-person workshop in South Minneapolis. So if you happen to be coming to the IEA conference, which Sam and I are also presenting on that, stay a day later and join us. Really, what's really awesome sort of about this particular workshop is one, we don't get to be in person very much together. And like, we're super excited to be in person doing a workshop, but it really is for personal transformation as well as transformation for clients. One of the things that has been really important to me when I do trainings and I do workshops is that even if you're coming in, because you can get CEUs, we got CEUs approved by the Board of Marriage and Family Therapy, 5.5, as well as 2 ethical and 2 cultural, 1 ethical. I keep mixing that up. Is that to me, it's like you can't be a good therapist for your clients if you don't work on yourselves. And so this workshop is really set up for, it can be for personal growth. It can be for how do you bring new techniques and things into your clients if you're coaching or you're a therapist. But it's really, you have to work on yourself to be a good therapist or coach. And so it really is set up in a way that we're working on ourselves as well as working on helping our clients.
So sign up before June 15th. That's when our pre-sale rate that we have going right now would end. It's linked in both of our bios. You can find it pretty easily. We're also advertising for it. So come and meet us in person. We would so love to meet folks in person in Minnesota in July.
Yep.
And I guess that's it for us. Anything else, Lyndsey?
No, I don't think so. And yes, CEUs are hard to get. So we're lucky, we're happy to be able to offer those. I don't think so. Just we will see you in July. Will probably be, actually July will be the second Friday of the month, not the first, because the first is the 4th of July. So just kind of stay posted on that. So it'll be a little bit of a switch from our normal kind of first sexy Friday, because most of us will be celebrating Independence Day or whatever. What's going on in the U.S. right now, celebrating the Independence Day for the United States. So we will see you until. Oh, go ahead.
I just said so. We'll see everybody on the second Friday of July.
Yep. Thank you for joining us. It was great to have people here with us today, and thanks for the comments. We always love that.
Bye. Lyndsey, see you in July.